The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the quiet woods. The trees seemed to stretch towards the horizon, their leaves rustling faintly in the breeze. Oliver had grown accustomed to these solitary walks, taking the same path through the woods after long days at work, seeking peace in the silence. But that evening, something felt different. A heavy, almost unnatural silence had descended on the forest, as though the very air held its breath. His heart quickened as he walked deeper, unease settling in his chest. The usual chirps and rustling sounds had stopped, leaving behind an eerie stillness. Then out of the corner of his eye, Oliver caught sight of something that made him freeze. In the middle of the trail, partially obscured by the trees, sat a towering figure. At first glance, he thought it might have been a trick of the light, but as his gaze sharpened, he realized it was a bear, though not like any bear he had ever seen before. It sat motionless, its back to him, its head bowed as though burdened by some deep sorrow. The bear let out a low, mournful sound, the kind of noise one might expect from a creature in profound distress. Oliver's blood ran cold. Bears were dangerous, especially at dusk, but this one seemed different. It wasn't aggressive or charging toward him, yet its presence filled him with an overwhelming sense of fear. His instincts screamed at him to turn and run, but something held him there. The bear, without any warning, raised its head slowly and turned to look directly at Oliver. Its gaze, normally a signal of danger, was filled with an unmistakable plea, a silent cry for help. The weight of its stare made Oliver's breath hitch, his body stiffening. He had no idea what to do. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to flee, yet he couldn't bring himself to move. The bear's gaze was magnetic, holding him in place. What was this? Was it madness? Why wasn't he running? Another mournful wail echoed through the forest, the sound reverberating deep into his bones. The bear, though clearly in distress, showed no signs of aggression. Instead, it seemed to be waiting for something, for someone. It was as if the animal was communicating without words, its silent sorrow touching a part of Oliver's heart that he didn't understand. Despite his fear, a deep curiosity tugged at him. Why was it crying? What could have brought this creature so low? He needed to know. Before he knew it, his feet were no longer frozen. Though every instinct told him to run, he found himself taking slow steps toward the bear. The air around him seemed to grow heavier, and the forest, which once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a labyrinth closing in. Oliver wasn't sure what was happening, but his legs moved on their own, following the bear as it began to walk away, turning its back on him once again, as though inviting him to follow. With every step, the forest seemed to grow denser, the shadows of the trees thickening, transforming the trail into a pathway of dark unknowns. Despite the eerie surroundings, something within him, something he couldn't explain, urged him to follow. The bear occasionally glanced over its shoulder, making sure Oliver was keeping pace. With each turn and step, the path became more difficult to navigate. The trees seemed to crowd around him, the underbrush thick with tangled roots and branches. Yet, the bear moved with such purpose, its path seemingly untouched by the obstacles that littered the forest floor. There was a grace in its movements, a knowledge of the terrain that was beyond anything Oliver could comprehend. Every time he hesitated, the bear would stop, just long enough to ensure that he was still there. As the journey continued, a strange sense of calm began to replace Oliver's initial fear. Despite the strange circumstances, despite the overwhelming sense of danger, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the right thing to do. The woods, once serene, were now suffocating. The air was growing colder, and the fading light of day only heightened the tension. Every rustle, every crack of a twig made Oliver jump, but the bear remained unbothered, moving steadily ahead. The sounds of the forest seemed to fade, replaced by a profound silence. Oliver's thoughts swirled. He had no idea what was happening, or why he was so drawn to the bear, but he couldn't stop now. The curiosity, that had gripped him earlier had transformed into something more, a need to understand, to discover what lay beyond the darkening woods. Then, just as the weight of the forest was becoming unbearable, they reached a clearing. The air felt thick, charged with an unspoken energy. Oliver's steps slowed as he looked around, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Between the trees, half hidden in the shadows, stood a decaying structure, an abandoned circus. Its once vibrant colors had faded to dull hues, the remnants of faded tents and rusting cages telling stories of a forgotten past. Oliver stood frozen, his mind racing to understand what he was seeing. A circus out here. The bear walked calmly into the clearing, unbothered by the surrounding ruin. Oliver followed, stepping carefully over broken toys and abandoned cages. The place was haunted by memories of suffering, its emptiness echoing the pain that had once filled it. The circus, a place that should have been filled with joy and excitement, was instead a testament to cruelty and exploitation. The bear moved toward the center, stopping in front of a large, empty cage. It was then that Oliver understood the bear wasn't just leading him here. It was showing him its past, the life it had once known in this very place. Oliver knelt before the cage, his heart sinking as he met the bear's gaze. "You've been here before, haven't you?" he whispered, his voice breaking with the weight of the realization. The bear gave a slight nod, confirming Oliver's worst fears. It had been part of this circus, trapped in a life of forced entertainment, just like the other animals that had once been confined here. The weight of the past hung heavy in the air, and Oliver felt an overwhelming sense of duty to help to free the animals that still remained. As the realization settled in, Oliver pulled out his phone, trying to call for help. The signal was weak, but he managed to send a message to the authorities, asking for immediate assistance. He knew time was running out, but the bear's silent presence gave him a sense of resolve. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about bringing justice to the forgotten creatures that had suffered here for far too long. The circus's dark history was about to be exposed, and Oliver knew that, with the help of the authorities, he could make sure this place would never imprison another animal again. As he turned back to the bear, he whispered, "I'm going to help you. I'll help them all." The bear stood beside him, a symbol of strength and resilience in the face of unimaginable suffering. And in that moment, Oliver knew his life would never be the same. What had begun as an ordinary walk in the woods had transformed into a mission that would change the fate of these animals forever.